Hello, welcome to Yoga Story Time. Today I'll be reading from the Yoga Sutras. Once I can figure out what I'm doing. Okay, I know there was a way. If I can figure out that technology. Oh man, thank you for your patience. Okay. I want... So we're taking a little pause from, we were reading the Intro to Yoga by Annie Besant, and we're taking a little detour right into the Yoga Sutras. So the Yoga Sutras are a book of kind of like guidelines for living the yogic lifestyle. Written by Patanjali, or thought to have been written by Patanjali. And we're going to get into this once I figure out how to do things. Okay, I know that there was like this really easy way for me to put things side by side. And now, for the life of me, I cannot remember what it was. So, give me just one moment here. All right, let me see if I do it this way. Okay, I think this is gonna work. Okay, great. Okay, so we are reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the book of the spiritual man, author Patanjali, editor Charles Johnston, and the release date of this book was 2001, February 1st, most recently updated May 14th, 2022. Now, this is an interpretation by Charles Johnston, because the original Yoga Sutras were in Sanskrit. So we're going to, I think today we'll be able to get through the introduction, and let's see, maybe, what did I put on here? Books. Oh, okay, book 1 and Sutras 1 through 15, I think is where our hour will land us. And if we go a little bit beyond Sutra 15, we might just go ahead and do that. And I'll offer a little bit of commentary here and there. I'll do my best if I can see the comments to interact with those. Let's see. Okay. No. Go back. There we go. Got it. All right, here we go. Introduction to Book 1 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are in themselves exceedingly brief, less than 10 pages of large type in the original. Just wanted to double check and make sure that the music was off. Okay. Yet they contain the essence of practical wisdom set forth in admirable order and detail. The theme, if the present interpreter be right, is the great regeneration, the birth of the spiritual from the physical man. The same theme which Paul so wisely and eloquently set forth in writing to his disciples in Corinth, the theme of all mystics in all lands. We think of ourselves as living a purely physical life in these material bodies of ours. In reality, we have gone far indeed from pure physical life. For ages, our life has been physical. Our life has been psychical. We have been centered and immersed in the psychic nature. Some of the schools of India say that the psychic nature is, as it were, a looking glass wherein are mirrored the things seen by the physical eyes and heard by the physical ears. But this is a magic mirror. The images remain and take a certain life of their own. Thus, within the psychic realm of our life, where there grows up an imaged world wherein we dwell, a world of the images of things seen and heard. Therefore, a world of memories, a world also of hopes and desires, of fears and regrets. Mental life grows up among these images, built on a measuring and comparing on the massing of images together into general ideas, on the abstraction of new notions and images from these, till a new world is built up from within, full of desires and hates, ambition, envy, longing, speculation, curiosity, self-will, self-interest. I realized that I did not actually have my mic properly, so the sound should be much better now. The teaching of the East is that all these are true powers overlaid by false desires, that though in manifestation psychical, they are in essence spiritual, that the psychical man is the veil and prophecy of the spiritual man. The purpose of life, therefore, is the realizing of that prophecy, the unveiling of the immortal man, the birth of the spiritual from the psychical, whereby we enter our divine inheritance and come to inhabit eternity. This is, indeed, salvation, the purpose of all true religion in all times. Patañjali has in mind the spiritual man, to be born from the psychical. His purpose is to set in order the practical means for the unveiling and regeneration, and to indicate the fruit, the glory, and the power of that new birth. Through the sutras of the first book, Patanjali is concerned with the first great problem, the emergence of the spiritual man from the veils and meshes of the psychic nature, the moods and vestures of the mental and emotional man. Later will come the consideration of the nature and powers of the spiritual man, once he stands clear of the psychic veils and trammels, and a view of the realms in which these new spiritual powers are to be revealed. At this point may come a word of explanation. I have been asked why I use the word sutras for these rules of Patanjali's system, when the word aphorism has been connected with them in our minds for a generation. The reason is this: the name aphorism suggests, to me at least, a pithy sentence of very general application, a piece of proverbial wisdom that may be quoted in a good many sets of circumstance, and which will almost bear on its face the evidence of its truth. But with a sutra, the case is different. It comes from the same root
as the word so, and means indeed a thread suggesting, therefore, a close-knit, consecutive chain of argument. Not only has each sutra a definite place in the system, but further, taken out of this place, it will be almost meaningless and will by no means be self-evident. So I have thought best to adhere to the original word. The Sutras of Patanjali are as closely knit together, as dependent on each other, as the propositions of Euclid, and can no more be taken out of their proper setting. In the second part of the first book, the problem of the emergence of the spiritual man is further dealt with. We are led to the consideration of the barriers to his emergence, of the overcoming of the barriers, and of certain steps and stages in the ascent from the ordinary consciousness of practical life to the finer, deeper, radiant consciousness of the spiritual man. All right, Book 1. 1. Om. Here follows instruction in union. Union, here as always in the scriptures of India, means union of the individual soul with the oversoul, of the personal consciousness with the divine consciousness, whereby the mortal becomes immortal and enters the eternal. Therefore, salvation is, first, freedom from sin and the sorrow which comes from sin, and then a divine and eternal well-being wherein the soul partakes of the being, the wisdom and glory of God. So, I want to be clear that this is an interpretation of a Sanskrit text. So as such, there will be probably words being used that are more familiar to a sort of more Western way of thinking about spirituality and maybe in some form or fashion religion. And this book being about this guidance toward a quote unquote higher self, or a more spiritual life over physical life, is what this particular book is about. And I think what happens sometimes, what gets conflated in yoga, as many of us think of it, particularly in the West, and particularly when we're thinking about the physical exercises of yoga. And one of the reasons that I wanted to start to introduce some of these different texts around yogic philosophy is that we don't often think about, some of us may not always think about the spiritual life or potential for spiritual life of the yogi, but rather focus more on the physical movement practices, maybe more on the breathing, and even meditation, but meditation detached from necessarily a deep spiritual or religious kind of contemplation. So I want to just make sure that we remember that this is someone's interpretation of the sutras, that there are other interpretations. I chose this one because it is the only one that is in the public domain through Gutenberg.org. So I wanted to make sure that I could read something that, or wanted to pick something that I could actually read and share publicly without any issues with that. Okay, so that was 1, Om. 2, union, spiritual consciousness is gained through control of the versatile psychic nature. The goal is the full consciousness of the spiritual man, illumined by the divine light. Nothing except the obdurate resistance of the psychic nature keeps us back from the goal. The psychical powers, our spiritual powers, run wild, perverted, drawn from their proper channel. Therefore, our first task is to regain control of this perverted nature, to chasten, purify, and restore the misplaced powers. The way that I would kind of characterize this as is us finding in a yogic yogic philosophy, us finding, or even in general, finding alignment with our spiritual nature. So spiritual nature, the way that I characterize it, is that each one of us has within us this place of deep love and peace and joy, a love that is divine, that goes beyond kind of a that's truly unconditional, and that allows us a freedom to be and to accept and to be free from fear, a joy that goes beyond just a surface level happiness of something that makes us feel good in the moment that's passing, but a joy that is beyond anything circumstantial, but rather, again, like just very deeply ingrained in our, what I would call spiritual being or higher self, and then a peace. And because I am more familiar with kind of Christian biblical lingo, I think of this as like a peace that passeth understanding, right? So this deep sense of peace, again, that is not connected to circumstances, not connected to anything that is outside of us, but a peace that we have regardless of what's happening outside of us. So this is what I'm seeing as union and spiritual consciousness, is really just how, to what degree are we aligning our spiritual self with our behaviors, actions, and the spiritual selves of all of those around us. 3. Then the seer comes to consciousness in his proper nature. Egotism is but the perversion of spiritual being. Ambition is the inversion of spiritual power. Passion is the distortion of love. The mortal is the limitation of the immortal. When these false images give place to true, then the spiritual man stands forth luminous as the sun when the clouds disperse. So we have to think a little bit about definitions here, right? Because for those of us who might consider ourselves ambitious, to kind of consider that ambition is antithetical to spirituality, the way that I am perceiving this personally, and do feel free to share in the comments your thoughts, anything that you are kind of butting heads with as we read through these texts. what I'm seeing this saying is that our spiritual power is not connected to or predicated upon our ambition for our kind of like validation or material ambition. Ambition being sort of this seeking, almost a as it says, egotism, almost sort of the seeking of power, a striving, whereas spirituality is more of a surrendering to what is. Same thing here with passion. It's saying passion being a distortion of love. I think if I'm reading this correctly and if I'm applying this idea of passion as antithetical to love, passion being more of a uncontrolled, we're not honing love, but rather we're just letting our emotions and our passions run wild. So if you think about passion, I know a lot of times we kind of put passion, like a fiery passion, we put passion together with fire, and the flames and fire doesn't always have to be a negative thing, of course, but a fire can, in certain contexts, get quite out of control. So this is how I'm seeing passion, whereas love is much more settled, controlled, and intentional than what I'm thinking they're considering passion or this interpretation is considering passion to be. But feel free to share your 2 cents in here as well. 4. Heretofore, the seer has been enmeshed in the activities of the psychic nature. The power and life, which are the heritage of the spiritual man, has been caught and enmeshed in psychical activities. Instead of pure being in the divine, there has been fretful, combative egotism, its hand against every man. Instead of the light of pure vision, there have been restless senses, have been imaginings. Instead of spiritual joy, the undivided joy of pure being, there has been self-indulgence of body and mind. These are all real forces, but distorted from their true nature and goal. They must be extricated like gems from the matrix, like the pith from the reed, steadily, without destructive violence. Spiritual powers are to be drawn forth from the psychic meshes. So when we think about our mental space and all of the noise, and I'm sure we'll get into a section about the noise of the mind. We're already kind of working that out. And this is kind of also an explanation of that previous, third sutra, passion, a distortion of love, ambition, inversion of spiritual power. So our psychical or the mental activities that are going on can be in direct combat really with divine nature. Mental space can be chaotic It can be a desire to control. It can be a desire to organize in a way that is more comfortable. It can be, as this says here, instead of pure being, it can be fearful and be fighting. I think of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. When our nervous system is, when our when our nervous system is kind of being attacked, or when we're in the space of panic or fear, or not aligned with divine, we can become fearful of unknown or uncertainty. We can become combative against our own good and goodness and wellness, against the goodness and wellness of others, even in attempting to be good and well. We can actually be combative if we're doing things that are out of alignment with that spiritual higher self. And then, of course, egotism, right? So serving self over serving others, or serving self in place, particularly in place of serving others. 5. The psychic activities are 5. They are either subject or not subject to the 5 hindrances. And there's a parenthesis here that says Book 2, Sutra 3. The psychic nature is built up through the image-making power, the power which lies behind and dwells in mind pictures. These pictures do not remain quiescent in the mind. They are kinetic, restless, stimulating to new acts. Thus, the mind image of an indulgence suggests and invites to a new indulgence. The picture of past joy is framed in regrets or hopes, and there is ceaseless play of the desire to know, to penetrate the essence of things, to classify. This, too, busies itself ceaselessly with the mind images, so that we may classify the activities of the psychic nature thus. So what I'm reading here, let's see. Yeah, so this kind of reminds me of when we talk about stories that we're making up in our mind. So often in this particular section here, where it says, thus the mind image of an indulgence suggests and invites to a new indulgence. The picture of past joy is framed in regrets or hopes. So regrets or hopes is actually a really big thing that we talk about when we talk about mindfulness and we talk about being present. We often talk about that as being present allows us to let go of past regret, or thinking about the past as, oh, I wish I could go back there. So a hope for something in the future that was past, or a hope for something different in the future from what was past. And being present can potentially have the ability to help us. And this is why I think mindfulness and meditation is so important, and movement, being present to our movement is so important. Whenever we're doing something where we're focused on something that is present, focused on the present moment, we have to let go of what is past. We have to let go of any regret or hope for, and we have to let go of anything that is future. Again, hope not being a bad word, but in the context of kind of a wishfulness or a not wanting to be here, but wanting to be there or there. And so when we are aligned spiritually, we always want to be here because we are not encumbered by past or future, but we are fully here. Feel free, again, to butt heads either with my thoughts or with the thoughts coming through in these sutras. And feel free also to agree, disagree, share. 6. These activities are sound intellection, unsound intellection, predication, sleep, memory. We have here a list of mental and emotional powers, of powers that picture and observe, and of powers that picture and feel. But the power to know and feel is spiritual and immortal. What is needed is not to destroy it, but to raise it from the psychical to the spiritual realm. So instead of intellectualizing our beings, our moment, at least this is how I'm kind of reading this, we want to move from, so I think about things that we can know intellectually, but until it's really embodied in us, it doesn't become fully realized or come into its full potential. So, for example, I might intellectually know that it's not it's not helpful for me to be in anger. But if I have not practiced and embodied being in a space of peace and love and joy and not anger, then I can intellectually know, yes, I don't want to be angry, and I know it's not healthy for me to be angry. However, I have not yet practiced to a point where that anger starts to dissipate and the peace and the love and the joy or the spiritual connection, these things I start to align more with my spiritual connection. And again, we're all kind of on these different places along I would say that we're all in different places along this path of humanity and different planes of spirituality. And I don't think any one is better than the other. We're just in different places. Yes, let me leave it. Let me leave that there. Okay. 7. The elements of sound intellection are direct observation, inductive reason, and trustworthy testimony. Each of these is a spiritual power, thinly veiled. Direct observation is the outermost form of the soul's pure vision. Inductive reason rests on the great principles of continuity and correspondence, and these on the supreme truth that all life is of the One. Trustworthy testimony, the sharing of one soul in the wisdom of another, rests on the ultimate oneness of all souls. 8. Unsound intellection is false understanding, not resting on a perception of the true nature of things. When the object is not truly perceived, when the observation is inaccurate and faulty, thought or reasoning based on that mistaken perception is of necessity false and unsound. 9. Prediction is carried on through words or thoughts, not resting on an object perceived. The purpose of this sutra is to distinguish between the mental process of prediction, of predication, and observation, induction, or testimony. Predication is the attribution of a quality or action to a subject by adding to it a predicate. In the sentence, "The man is wise," the man is the subject, is wise is the predicate. This may be simply an interplay of thoughts without the presence of the object thought of, or the things thought of may be imaginary or unreal, while observation, induction, and testimony always go back to an object. 10. Sleep is the psychic condition which rests on mind states, all material things being absent. In waking life, we have two currents of perception, an outer current of physical things seen and heard and perceived, an inner current of mind images and thoughts. The outer current ceases in sleep. The inner current continues. And watching the mind images float before the field of consciousness, we dream. Even when there are no dreams, there is still a certain consciousness in sleep, so that on waking, one says, "I have slept well," or "I have slept badly." So just to kind of add a little bit of the science of sleep into this, because I find it so interesting how we have these, how so often science can actually validate many of these ancient pieces of wisdom, and sleep being one of those things. So what sleep does and why it's so important for our mental health, for our physical health, for our prefrontal cortex that holds the space of reasoning, of decision making, is because when we sleep, what happens in the brain is, one, there is still activity always happening. As long as we're living, there's always activity happening in the brain. However, when we kind of drift into the different stages of sleep and drift more and more into those deeper stages of sleep, and I won't get too deep in the weeds here, but this creates more narrow pathways in the brain, and it also helps to connect what we have learned in the previous day or days. It helps us to remember. So it helps with memory, and in fact, we're going to get into memory here next in the next sutra. When we get good sleep, long enough sleep, and go through all of the stages of sleep, we're able to better remember the things that we've learned it enhances our quality of learning and understanding, and it enhances that, again, the activity of the prefrontal cortex, which helps with reasoning, decision making, with memory, hippocampus, with memory. Sleep really it helps a great deal with our ability to function cognitively as well as emotionally. So let's get into that 11. 11. Memory is holding to mind images of things perceived without modifying them. I'll share after I read this. Here, as before, the mental power is explained in terms of mind images, which are the material of which the psychic world is built. Therefore, the sages teach that the world of our perception, which is indeed a world of mind images, is but the wraith or shadow of the real and everlasting world. In this sense, memory is but the physical inversion of the spiritual, ever-present vision. Let me read that once more. In this sense, memory is but the psychical inversion of the spiritual, ever-present vision. That which is ever before the spiritual eye of the seer needs not to be remembered. So the reason that I kind of am amused by the title of this sutra, memory is holding to mind images of things perceived without modifying them, is because we know through science and research that our mind actually does modify memory. So our pure memory, if we could have such a thing, our pure memory might not be modified. However, because of our brain's desire, our biological desire to make sense of the world around us, including our memories, oftentimes we'll find that, in fact, people, you could maybe do a little experiment here yourself. Talk to people around you about what their experience. If you were in a similar place, saw similar people, had a similar experience, maybe like 5-10 years ago, talk to some of the people that you had that experience with and see how others remember it. Because what we'll find, and in fact, I've talked to, I have 2 younger sisters, and we've talked about this a little bit, how we remember childhood differently, different childhood moments differently. Our memory, we have this biological desire to make sense of the world around us. And so our memory often will fill in, our mind will fill in the gaps in our memory, because there often are gaps in our memory. And so in order to kind of complete the story, our mind wants to fill those things in. And I remember this being a big debate, and it might still be now. I've been a little bit out of the academic world of writing, but when I was going to school, I was going to a university, and I took several creative writing classes. And I remember there being this big debate, especially when everything came out about the book, A Million Little Pieces, I believe it was called. I'm so sorry. Somebody will have to correct me. But the book that was said to be, where the author had said that they based the book on their real life experience, and then it came out that in fact it was fiction and not based on their real life experience. And the question came up of, well, does that make the book any less valuable or any less impactful, right? Because a lot of people were very moved by this book. And then some people still moved by it and still said, well, it doesn't matter if it was fiction, but some people felt very betrayed, right? Because, you have this person that said, and so it got into this whole kind of big debate about fiction versus nonfiction, the marketability of fiction versus nonfiction, and then this whole debate about memory. And when we're writing nonfiction, does it have to be does every scene have to be perfectly remembered, or rather, can we use creative filling in of gaps to kind of fill in the story, or should we only stick to what we actually remember and not try to fill those things in? But if we think about our biology and the science of our brain, of which we'll certainly not in my lifetime, or probably anyone here's lifetime, or will not get to the full understanding of all of the complexities of our brain and nervous system. But is it even possible to fully remember perfectly accurately our past experiences? And I would argue that it is perfectly okay to fill in the gaps creatively when recalling a story, as long as the feeling of that moment is still being expressed. Now, others may disagree, but this is kind of a long-winded explanation of why I was kind of amused by this idea of memory holding mind images without modifying them, because it's just not a natural thing for us to not modify, for our memories not to be modified. All of that aside, 12. The control of these psychic activities comes through the right use of the will and through ceasing from self-indulgence. If these psychical powers and energies, even such evil things as passion and hate and fear, are but spiritual powers fallen and perverted, how are we to bring about their release and restoration? Two means are presented to us: the awakening of the spiritual will and the purification of mind and thought. Excuse me. So, what I really love about the way that he is conceptualizing this here is, even though he's using the word evil, he's also saying passion, hate, and fear are but spiritual powers fallen and perverted. So there is sort of a non-judgmental leaning into that. It's not that passion and hate and fear that these are natural things that we have come into our minds, into our worlds, into our interactions, just by virtue of being human. However, if we can see that, and this is, I think, where we get to this place of when we accept where we're at, when we accept that, okay, I am more in passion than in love, or I'm more in hate than in, what would be, because I see love as kind of the counterbalance to fear. But let's just go ahead. If we're more in hate or fear, and actually hate and fear are can be very closely related. Oftentimes we hate what we're afraid of, whether that's something within ourselves, our own emotions, or whether that's something in someone else, or someone else because they're different from us, right? So hate and fear are very, very connected, or can be very connected. And so this idea that passion and hate and fear, we're not bringing this up because it's not normal. It's quite normal for us to be in passion, to be hateful, to be fearful. It's our human history, quite unfortunately, but it's really just a misalignment. And I think when we start to see these things as misalignments, rather than something to like kind of be fighting against or with, we can start to just gently observe where hate is coming up, or where fear is coming up, or where a indulgent passion or selfish passion is coming up, and noticing these things without necessarily resisting, but instead redirecting. Okay, there is a misalignment in this area. How can I come into alignment so that this hate and this fear and this self-indulgent passion starts to become less, and the beauty and the spiritual parts of myself start to become more. And yes, I use my hands a lot in speaking. We have 2 more, and then we will close with a few breaths. 13. The right use of the will is the steady effort to stand in spiritual being. We have thought of ourselves perhaps as creatures moving upon this earth, rather helpless at the mercy of storm and hunger and our enemies. We are to think of ourselves as immortals, dwelling in the light, encompassed and sustained by spiritual powers. The steady effort to hold this thought will awaken dormant and unrealized powers, which will unveil to us the nearness of the eternal. I'm having a number of different thoughts here. I think that is a really beautiful way to put it. I also want to acknowledge that this work is very difficult, because storm and hunger and our enemies, we can feel quite helpless at times. And so I don't want to dismiss that fact. And I don't want to dismiss that leaning into, even just being here right now, reading this, or for you all listening, there's a privilege in that. There's a privilege, I think, to leaning into spiritual space when you're in survival mode and you're just trying to put food on the table. You're not necessarily, this is not true of everyone, but you're not necessarily thinking about, how can I align myself spiritually, right? When you're living paycheck to paycheck, when you're unhoused, when you're going through major mental health crises or major physical health crises. I want to make sure that we're acknowledging the privilege inherent in seeking our spiritual space and selves. That is not to suggest that we cannot, at the same time that we're going through very difficult things, and in fact, many times when we're going through very difficult things is when, oftentimes when people start to seek the spiritual. And that can be good or bad, depending on the context of what kind of spiritual spaces they land in. But I do want to acknowledge that to have a steadiness and to lean toward a spiritual path it just is a very privileged position. So I just think that's important to acknowledge, first and foremost. Mostly because for those of us that are on that path, that are leaning toward spirituality, that maybe are not as concerned with survival, putting food on the table. We have a home, we have clothing, we have shelter, we have food, we have water. For those of us that are not concerned about those things in the moment, I think it's that much more important to show compassion toward those who are concerned about those things. And we can still seek a spiritual path and a spiritual understanding without holding judgment towards those who are not. So I want to be very clear on that, because we can put ourselves in this position of egotism while seeking spirituality if we position ourselves as above those who are not seeking spiritual paths, or putting ourselves above anyone. So again, just to reiterate, we're all in a different place contextually in our humanity, in our spiritual walk, and no one of us is better than the other for seeking or not seeking truth, spirituality, and so on. So I just think that's important to relate here. 2 more sutras. 14. This becomes a firm resting place when followed long, persistently, with earnestness. We must seek spiritual life in conformity with the laws of spiritual life, with earnestness, humility, gentle charity, which is an acknowledgement of the one soul within us all. Only through obedience to that shared life, through perpetual remembrance of our openness with all divine being, our nothingness apart from divine being, can we enter our inheritance. 15. Ceasing from self-indulgence is conscious mastery over the thirst for sensuous pleasure here or there or hereafter. Rightly understood, the desire for sensation is the desire of being, the distortion of the soul's eternal life. The lust of sensual stimulus and excitation rests on the longing to feel one's life keenly, to gain the sense of being really alive. This sense of true life comes only with the coming of the soul, and the soul comes only in silence, after self-indulgence has been courageously and loyally stilled, through reverence before the coming soul. So we may all have different ideas about that. Biologically, our bodies crave homeostasis. So this is how I understand a spiritual life. a spiritual life is the seeking or the craving of homeostasis. When we're overly stimulated, or not necessarily even overly stimulated, but to be excited, or to be, sad, down, depressed. Both of these things can be an extreme and pull us away from being aligned with spirituality, is how I'm understanding this. This idea of self-indulgence, I don't want us to, I would encourage us to think about what that means for us in our lives. I think there's something very beautiful about celebration, for example, and I think there's something very beautiful about embracing others in a hug, sharing a kiss with a romantic partner, moving our bodies to feel our bodies moving. So I don't think that this is necessarily suggesting that to sense and to be in our senses and to be in a place of sensual pleasure is a bad thing. However, what I am seeing here and how I conceptualize this is a moderation and a seeking of, just as our bodies physically seek homeostasis, that our mental and emotional space, our spiritual space is, when aligned, is a place of peace, contentedness, and homeostasis. So we're not seeking pleasure because we are contented in how we feel, how we're experiencing our life in the moment, our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual space. So it's a sense of contentedness with, whereas oftentimes these kind of sensuous pleasure or self-indulgence in particular, it's not sustaining, right? We are not sustained by a piece of cake, for example. We'll just say it that way. We're not sustained by a piece of cake. A piece of cake can be a beautiful thing to experience and to enjoy. And I think that we can enjoy some of these things mindfully, but it can become a burden to our spiritual life and our spiritual path, and antagonistic to spirituality when we're just seeking the pleasure from eating that cake over and over and over again, instead of being contented in having had that one experience with it, I think is probably the best way that I can put that, and the way that I'm kind of conceptualizing alignment with spirituality as in antithesis to self-indulgence. So with that, we will pause there and we will come back to that another time. That is the Yoga Sutras. And when we, I'm not sure when we'll come back to this. Maybe we'll do this on Sundays semi-regularly, the Yoga Sutras, but we'll also get back into the introduction to yoga book as well. So here we are. Yes. And thank you for those who have interacted in the comments. Once we build the community a little bit more, I'll interact a little bit more. I cannot tell you why my face and way of speaking is so soothing, but it is part of the way of speaking. I have often been told that I have a beautiful speaking voice. So it is one of the reasons why I actually started teaching yoga and then guiding meditation. And it is one of the reasons that I put myself out there here to read to you all. So thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's important for us to lean into our strengths and our talents and our gifts and to share those in whatever way makes sense with whomever it makes sense for us to share it. And right now, this is what makes sense for me. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being you. Take care of yourselves out there. Peace.